He couldn't scream when he chose her, couldn't beg when he claimed her as his wife in front of everyone. A slave, mute since childhood, invisible to a world that had already decided she was nothing. But the Viking Jarl didn't want a partner. He wanted silence, a wife who could never question him, never challenge him, never speak his secrets. It was the cruelest mercy anyone had ever shown her. What he didn't know was that silence had made her dangerous, that 13 years without a voice had taught her to listen, to see, to collect every whispered secret, every hidden betrayal, every truth people revealed when they thought no one was paying attention. And in a world built on loyalty and honor, she discovered something that would either save them all or destroy everything. Because when she uncovered the conspiracy that threatened to starve the entire settlement, when she stood before a warrior who would kill to keep his secrets buried, when she risked everything for people who had given her nothing, she learned the most terrifying truth of all. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay silent, even when silence is all you have. But courage comes with a price, and the knife at her throat was just the beginning. The mead hall reeked of stale beer and unwashed bodies, but Astrid had learned long ago not to react to smells. She moved between the wooden benches like a shadow, invisible fingers collecting clay cups and gnawed bones from the feast. The Jarl's daughter Ingrid sat near the fire pit, her spine rigid as an iron blade, watching Astrid with eyes that promised violence. Astrid kept her gaze down. Safer that way. Always safer. Halvard's voice cut through the raucous laughter, slurred and thick with drink. "Bring more ale, girl. My throat's as dry as Thor's wit." She nodded, hands already reaching for the pitcher. Her bare feet made no sound against the packed earth floor, centuries of feasts compressed into something harder than stone. Beneath her soles, the weight of the pitcher pulled at her shoulders as she approached the Jarl's seat, her heart hammering against her ribs in that old familiar rhythm of fear. He grabbed her wrist. His fingers were hot, fever hot, and squeezed until bone ground against bone. Astrid's mouth opened in a silent gasp, but no sound emerged. It never did. 13 years of silence, and still her body tried to scream. "Look at me when I address you, thrall." She lifted her eyes. Halvard's face was flushed red from the fire and the drink, his graying beard matted with food. But his eyes held something else, something that made her stomach twist. Not lust. Worse, calculation. "You're what? 19 winters now?" He didn't wait for an answer. How could she give one? "Old enough." He released her wrist and she stumbled back, nearly dropping the pitcher. Mead sloshed over the rim, darkening the dirt at her feet. "My first wife had a voice like a seagull, screeched at me morning till night. Halvard, the thralls are lazy. Halvard, the carls disrespect you. Halvard, you drink too much." He spat into the rushes. She was right about the drinking. I'll give her that. Laughter rippled through the hall, but it had an uncertain edge. Astrid's pulse quickened. Something was wrong. The air felt charged, like before a summer storm over the fjord. "A man needs a wife," Halvard continued, louder now, playing to his audience. "The elders won't shut their withered mouths about it. Find a proper woman, Halvard. Secure an alliance, Halvard. Think of your legacy." He stood, swaying slightly, and the hall fell silent. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. "But I'm tired of voices, tired of words, tired of being told what to do by women who think themselves wise." "No." Astrid's fingers went numb around the pitcher handle. "No, no, no. You." He pointed at her, and every eye in the longhouse turned to stare. Her skin crawled with the weight of their attention. "You'll be my wife." The pitcher slipped from her hands and shattered against the floor. Mead spread like blood across the packed earth, seeping into the cracks. Astrid's vision tunneled. The warmth drained from her face, from her fingers, from everywhere. Ingrid shot to her feet, her face twisted with something beyond rage. "Father, you're drunk. This is madness. She's a thrall, a mute thrall. You cannot—" "I can do whatever I damn well please." Halvard's voice dropped to something cold and sharp as river ice. "I'm Jarl here, or have you forgotten?" He turned back to Astrid, and the cruelty in his smile made her throat close. You won't question my decisions, won't nag me about honor or politics, won't whisper my secrets to rivals. You can't." He laughed, and the sound echoed off the timber walls. Perfect. Astrid's legs wouldn't move. Her mind screamed at her to run, to flee into the winter night and let the cold take her, but her body had turned to stone. Around her, the Carls shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others stared with undisguised curiosity or disgust. "The law allows it," old Bjorn spoke up from near the door, his voice raspy. "A thrall can be freed and married. It's been done." "Just because you can doesn't mean you should," Ingrid hissed. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, knuckles white. "This is an insult to my mother's memory. An insult to every free woman in this hall, to our entire clan. Your mother is dead." Halvard's words fell like stones. "And you're not Jarl. I'll marry who I please when I please." He gestured dismissively toward Astrid. "Take her to the women's quarters. Clean her up. The ceremony will be at first light." Two thrall women emerged from the shadows and gripped Astrid's arms. She didn't resist. Couldn't. Her body had gone somewhere else. Somewhere far away where Jarls didn't exist and girls weren't sold like livestock. They dragged her toward the back of the hall, past faces blurred by tears she refused to let fall. At the doorway, she looked back. Halvard had already returned to his drinking, dismissing her existence as easily as swatting a fly. But Ingrid stood frozen near the fire, staring at Astrid with hatred so pure it burned hotter than the flames. Her lips moved, forming words Astrid couldn't hear over the blood rushing in her ears. The night air hit her like a fist, cold, merciless. The two women pulled her across the frozen ground toward the thrall's quarters, their grip bruising her arms. Above, stars scattered across the black sky like shards of broken ice. Inside the low building, they stripped her wool dress away and dumped freezing water over her head. She gasped silently, her body convulsing. One woman scrubbed her skin with rough cloth until it burned red. The other combed through her hair with brutal efficiency, ripping through tangles without mercy. "You think you've won something," the older woman muttered, her breath hot against Astrid's ear. "You think this makes you better than us. But you're still nothing. Just a mute playing at being free." Astrid closed her eyes. Let them think what they wanted. Let them all think she was simple, empty-headed, blessed by fortune she didn't deserve. They didn't know, couldn't know. She'd been 5 winters old when the raiders came, 5 winters old when she'd watched her father's throat cut, watched her mother dragged away screaming, 5 winters old when she'd hidden in the root cellar, hand clamped over her own mouth so hard. She'd tasted blood, willing herself to disappear, to be silent, to survive. And when they'd found her the next morning, shaking and covered in her family's blood, her voice had been gone. Shocked away, the old healer had said. Maybe it would return. Maybe it wouldn't. It had returned. 3 years later, alone in the barn, she'd whispered her own name just to prove she could. The sound had terrified her more than the silence ever had. Because she'd learned something in those 3 years. She'd learned that people spoke freely around those who couldn't speak back. They revealed secrets, confessed fears, admitted crimes. They'd forgotten she had ears, a mind, a memory that held everything like water in cupped palms. She'd learned that silence was a weapon, that invisibility was armor, that a girl without a voice could hear everything. Now, as they dressed her in a clean linen shift that smelled of rosemary and smoke, Astrid made a choice. She would marry the Jarl. She would become his silent wife. And she would listen to every whispered conversation, every drunken confession, every careless word spoken in her presence. And when the time came, when she understood exactly what kind of man had claimed her, when she knew every secret this hall held, she would decide what to do with all that dangerous knowledge. The older woman yanked the comb through one final tangle, and Astrid's head snapped back. Tomorrow she would be the Jarl's wife. Tonight she was still just a thrall. But beneath her carefully blank expression, behind her silent lips, her mind was already working, already watching, already planning. The door burst open. Ingrid stood silhouetted against the starlight, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air. "Leave us." Her voice left no room for argument. The two women fled. Ingrid stepped inside and closed the door. In the dim light of the single oil lamp, her face looked carved from pale stone. She moved closer, and Astrid's heart hammered against her ribs. Like a trapped bird. "You think you're clever," Ingrid whispered, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. "You think you'll waltz into my mother's place, sit at her table, sleep in her bed. But I see you, thrall. I see exactly what you are." She leaned in until their faces were inches apart. "And I will make certain you regret the day my father's eyes fell on you. Every single day of your miserable life, you will regret it." Astrid held her gaze, didn't flinch, didn't look away. Ingrid's hand shot out and grabbed Astrid's throat, not squeezing, just holding, a promise. "You can't even scream, can you?" A terrible smile curved her lips. How convenient. She released her grip and walked out, leaving the door hanging open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of snow and pine and something else. Something that smelled like the ending of one life and the beginning of another. Astrid stood alone in the thrall's quarters, her throat still burning where Ingrid's fingers had pressed. Outside, the village slept. Tomorrow the sun would rise on her wedding day. Tomorrow she would cease being property and become something else. Something worse, perhaps, or something more dangerous than anyone in this cursed place could possibly imagine. She touched her throat, feeling the rapid flutter of her pulse beneath her fingertips. And for the first time in 13 years, she almost let herself speak, almost let the words come. But she pressed her lips together and swallowed the sound. Not yet, not yet. Dawn came too quickly. Astrid watched through the gap in the door as gray light bled across the frozen ground, turning ice crystals into tiny daggers of silver. Her body hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Every muscle remained coiled tight, waiting for something she couldn't name. The older thrall woman from the night before entered without knocking, carrying a bundle of cloth that smelled of cedar and age. "The Jarl's first wife wore this," she said flatly, dropping the bundle at Astrid's feet. Ingrid insisted. The emphasis on the last word made clear this was meant as insult, not honor. Astrid unfolded the dress. Deep blue wool, the color of the fjord at twilight, with embroidered borders along the sleeves and hem. The stitching was exquisite, tiny knots forming patterns of waves and ravens. A dead woman's dress, a dead woman's life, waiting to swallow her whole. She pulled it over her head. The fabric hung loose around her shoulders. Halvard's first wife had been larger, broader. Astrid looked like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. "Doesn't fit," the woman observed with something that might have been satisfaction. She produced a leather belt, cinching it tight around Astrid's waist until the dress bunched and gathered. There, good enough for a thrall bride. Outside, voices gathered. The entire village would attend, not out of celebration, but curiosity, morbid fascination. They wanted to witness the Jarl's madness, to see the mute thrall elevated above them all. To judge, to remember, to use against him later when the politics demanded it. The woman gripped Astrid's arm and led her toward the longhouse. Morning cold bit through the wool, raising goose flesh along her arms. Her breath formed clouds that dissipated into nothing, like words she'd never speak. Across the village square, faces turned to watch. Some curious, some disgusted, others carefully blank, hiding their thoughts behind practiced masks. The longhouse doors stood open. Inside, torches blazed despite the daylight, casting everything in shades of orange and shadow. Halvard waited near the center post, dressed in a tunic of deep red with arm rings of twisted silver gleaming against his forearms. He looked almost regal. Almost. Until you saw his eyes, bloodshot and hollow, still drunk from the night before or already drunk anew. Hard to tell which. The Godi, the spiritual leader, stood beside him. Old Torsten, with his staff of carved ash and beard. White as winter. His face remained impassive, but his knuckles were white where they gripped the staff. Even he disapproved. But Jarls paid well, and gods supposedly forgave much. Astrid's escort released her arm and melted into the crowd. She stood alone at the entrance, every eye boring into her skin. The weight of their stares made her ribs feel too tight, her lungs unable to expand fully. She forced herself to walk forward, one step, another. The dead woman's dress whispered against the rushes on the floor. Ingrid stood to the left, dressed in black, mourning clothes. The message was clear. She watched Astrid approach with eyes like chips of flint, her jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped beneath her skin. Halvard beckoned impatiently. "Come, girl, let's have this done." She reached his side. Up close, she could smell the mead on him, sour and thick. Could see the broken blood vessels across his nose. The tremor in his hands he tried to hide by crossing his arms. "Torsten," began the ceremony. His voice droned through the old words, the binding promises, the oaths that would tie her to this man until death. Astrid heard none of it. Her mind had gone elsewhere, floating somewhere above her body, watching this scene unfold like a saga told by a skald, a tragedy in the making. "The bride will signal her consent," Torsten said, his voice cutting through her dissociation. Everyone waited. Halvard's jaw tightened. "She's mute, you old fool. Obviously she consents. She's here, isn't she?" "The law requires clear consent," Torsten replied carefully. "A nod will suffice." All eyes turned to her. This was it, the moment she could refuse. Could shake her head and walk away and return to being property. Simple property, invisible property, safe property. But safety was an illusion. She'd learned that 13 years ago in a root cellar while her world burned, and remaining a thrall meant remaining vulnerable to every cruel hand, every violent impulse, every moment of drunken rage from anyone who outranked her, which was everyone. At least as Halvard's wife, she'd have some protection, some small measure of power, and access. Access to conversations, to decisions, to the inner workings of this place that kept her enslaved. She nodded. Halvard's shoulders relaxed. Around them, the crowd shifted, murmuring. The thing was done. Torsten concluded the ceremony with words about fertility and prosperity and the blessings of the gods. Empty words. Everyone knew this. Marriage was cursed before it began, but tradition demanded the forms be observed, so they observed them. "You may present the bride's gift," Torsten said. Halvard produced a small wooden box from his belt. Inside lay a ring, not silver or gold, but simple carved bone, white as frost, with runes etched along the band. He took her hand, his grip firm enough to hurt, and slid it onto her finger. It was too large. It would slip off the moment she bent her hand wrong. "There," he said loudly, addressing the crowd more than her. "It's done. My wife." The word sounded strange in his mouth, like he was testing it out, deciding if he liked the taste. He didn't release her hand. Instead, he pulled her closer, his breath hot against her ear. "Don't make me regret this, girl. I chose you for your silence. Keep it that way." A threat and a command and a promise all wrapped in one. She felt the violence coiled in him, held back only by the thinnest veneer of control. This man could hurt her. Would hurt her probably, when the mood struck. But she'd survived worse. She'd survived watching her family butchered. She'd survived 13 years of slavery. She could survive this. The feast began immediately. Tables were dragged out, laden with roasted meat and dried fish and precious winter stores brought forth to celebrate a marriage no one wanted. Astrid was led to the high seat, the place of honor beside Halvard, the place his first wife had occupied. The carved wood still held the impression of another woman's body, worn smooth by years of use. She sat. The bone ring clicked against the arm of the chair, too loose, mocking. Food appeared before her. She couldn't eat. Her throat had closed up, her stomach a knot of ice. Beside her, Halvard ate with brutal efficiency, tearing into meat with his teeth, barely chewing. He drank more, always more. The ale horn never seemed to empty. Across the table, Ingrid picked at her food, her movements precise and controlled. But her eyes never left Astrid's face. Watching, waiting, calculating. The Karls and their wives approached throughout the meal, offering stiff congratulations that fooled no one. "May you be blessed with sons," one woman said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Though I wonder what kind of mother a mute can be." Another leaned in close. "The Jarl's first wife died in childbirth, you know. Screamed for 3 days before the bleeding took her. But you won't be able to scream, will you?" Each word was a small knife, precisely placed. Astrid kept her face blank. Let them think their cruelty landed. Let them believe her simple and easily wounded. People underestimated those they thought weak, and underestimation was another kind of weapon. A fight broke out near the door. 2 Karls, drunk and angry, grappling over some perceived insult. Halvard barely glanced their way. "Bjorn, handle it." His second in command, a bear of a man with a scar bisecting his face, moved to separate them with casual violence. "Your father grows weak," a voice murmured. Astrid's eyes flickered toward the sound. 2 men, minor jarls from neighboring lands, sat 3 seats down. They thought themselves out of earshot. They weren't. This marriage proves it. Desperation masked as eccentricity. "Give it time," the other replied. "Weak leaders don't last long, especially with wolves circling." They said nothing more, but the implication hung heavy. Plots within plots. Halvard had enemies, real ones, not just disapproving neighbors. Astrid filed the information away, another piece of the puzzle she was assembling. Knowledge was power. Silence made people careless, and careless people revealed everything. The feast dragged on for hours. The sun arced across the sky and began its descent. Shadows lengthened. Someone produced a lyre, and drunken singing filled the hall, off-key and raucous. Halvard's head began to nod, his eyes struggling to focus. Finally, mercifully, Torsten stood and raised his staff. The bedding ceremony. Astrid's blood turned to ice water. No, she'd known this was coming. Had to come. But knowing didn't make it easier. Didn't make her body stop shaking as hands gripped her arms and pulled her to standing. Women surrounded her, their faces flushed with drink and excitement. This was entertainment for them. A spectacle. They led her toward the back of the longhouse, toward Halvard's private chamber, the room where his first wife had died screaming. The bed loomed. Large in the dim light, covered in furs that smelled of must and thyme. Behind her, men dragged Halvard, laughing and making crude jokes. He stumbled, barely able to walk, his eyes glazed. They pushed him into the room and someone slammed the door shut. Cheers erupted from the other side of the wood. Halvard swayed on his feet, squinting at her like he'd forgotten who she was. Then his eyes focused, sharpened. He took a step forward. Astrid's back hit the wall. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He reached for her, and she closed her eyes, waiting for pain, for violence, for the inevitable horror. His hand touched her shoulder, then dropped away. She opened her eyes. Halvard had collapsed onto the bed, face first into the furs. Within seconds, his breathing deepened, became the heavy rhythmic sound of unconsciousness. He was asleep, too drunk to even remember why they were here. Relief flooded through her so powerfully her knees buckled. She slid down the wall and sat on the floor, hugging, her knees to her chest. Outside, the celebration continued, oblivious. Inside, she was alone with a sleeping Jarl and a temporary reprieve. But reprieve wasn't salvation. Tomorrow night would come, and the night after. Eventually, Halvard would be sober enough to remember he'd taken a wife. 3 weeks passed in a strange, suspended reality. Astrid moved through the longhouse like a ghost wearing a dead woman's skin, neither thrall nor truly wife, existing in some undefined space that made everyone uncomfortable, including herself. Halvard barely spoke to her. Mornings, he'd wake with a groan, stumble from the bed they technically shared but never touched in, and disappear into his duties. Evenings, he'd return drunk, collapse beside her, and the cycle would repeat. She'd become a piece of furniture in his life, present but irrelevant. The relief should have been overwhelming. Instead, it felt like waiting for an axe to fall, because axes always fell eventually. She'd begun working in the kitchens again, despite Ingrid's protests that it was beneath the Jarl's wife. But idleness meant visibility, and visibility meant scrutiny. In the kitchens, she could fade into routine, listen to the thralls gossip, watch the free women interact. Learn. Did you hear? Una, the head cook, whispered to her assistant while chopping onions. Her thick fingers worked with surprising delicacy. Bjorn's been meeting with the Ragnarssons 3 times in the last week. The Jarls from the Western Territories? The assistant's eyes widened. But they're... Exactly. Una glanced around, her gaze sliding over Astrid without truly seeing her. Just the mute girl in the corner grinding herbs. Nothing to worry about. Halvard's treaty with them expires at spring thaw. If Bjorn's courting their favor... She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Bjorn, Halvard's most trusted warrior, meeting secretly with potential rivals. The implications formed a web of betrayal that made Astrid's skin crawl. She filed it away, another thread in the tapestry she was weaving in her mind. Every conversation, every furtive glance, every tension-filled silence. She collected them all like a raven hoarding shiny objects. The kitchen door burst open. Ingrid swept in, bringing cold air and colder fury. "Where is my father's wife?" The words dripped with contempt. Una pointed wordlessly at Astrid. Ingrid's jaw tightened. "You, come with me. Now." Astrid set down the mortar and pestle, wiped her hands on her apron, and followed. What choice did she have? Ingrid led her through the longhouse, past the great hall where men practiced sword forms in the weak winter light filtering through smoke holes, past the weaving room where women worked looms with mechanical efficiency, to a small storage room at the back of the complex. Ingrid shut the door behind them. The space was cramped, smelling of dried herbs and old leather. Barely enough room for 2 people to stand without. Touching. "Do you think you're clever?" Ingrid's voice was soft, which made it more terrifying than shouting. "Playing the humble servant while wearing my mother's ring?" She grabbed Astrid's hand, yanking it up between them. The bone ring caught the dim light. "Do you think this makes you family? Makes you one of us?" Astrid met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "You're nothing," Ingrid hissed. "A placeholder, a joke. My father will tire of this game, and when he does, you'll go back to being exactly what you are, a thrall with delusions." She leaned closer, her breath hot against Astrid's face. "But I won't wait for him to see reason. I'll make your life so miserable you'll beg him to cast you out." She released Astrid's hand with a shove and stormed from the room, leaving the door hanging open. Astrid stood in the darkness, her heart hammering. The threat was real. Ingrid had power, connections, the love of the Karls who'd watched her grow from childhood. Astrid had nothing except silence and the secrets she collected like weapons she didn't yet know how to use. That night, lying beside Halvard's unconscious form, she stared at the shadows dancing across the ceiling. The bone ring felt heavy on her finger. She should remove it, should accept that this marriage was a farce, that she'd always be nothing here. But something stubborn in her refused. She'd survived this long by being invisible. Maybe it was time to try something different. The next morning she woke before dawn. Halvard still snored, reeking of mead and sweat. She dressed quietly and made her way to the great hall, empty except for thralls cleaning yesterday's mess. She found parchment and charcoal, rare luxuries kept for recording trades and treaties. Her hands shook as she drew. Simple pictures: a loaf of bread, a jug of water, a bed. Beside each, she marked numbers, portions, quantities, an inventory. Una found her an hour later, surrounded by crude drawings. The cook's eyebrows rose. "What's this?" Astrid pointed at the drawings, then at the storage rooms, made a sweeping gesture encompassing the entire longhouse. Una's weathered face crinkled in thought. "You're taking inventory of our winter stores?" Astrid nodded emphatically. "Why would—" Understanding dawned. You think we're running short? Another nod, because they were. Astrid had been counting, watching portions shrink, noticing how carefully Una measured everything now, how she watered down the stews, how meat appeared less frequently. They were 3 months from spring, and supplies were dwindling faster than they should. Someone was stealing from the stores, or selling them, or both. Una's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. If we run out before thaw? She didn't finish, didn't need to. Starvation was a specter that haunted every Nordic winter, always one bad season away from reality. Can you show me? Una asked quietly. Astrid led her to the storage shed, pointed at the nearly empty barrels of salted fish that should have been 3/4 full, the grain sacks that felt too light, the dried meat hanging on hooks, far less than Una had personally counted at autumn's end. Gods, Una breathed. Someone's been... She turned to Astrid, eyes sharp. How long have you known? Astrid held up both hands. 2 weeks. And you didn't tell anyone? Couldn't tell anyone. Una's voice softened with something that might have been pity or respect. Hard to tell. What were you planning to do? Astrid picked up the charcoal again, drew quickly. A man's face, broad, scarred, unmistakable. Bjorn, Una whispered. You think Bjorn's behind this? Astrid shrugged. She didn't know for certain, but Bjorn controlled the guards who watched the storage sheds. Bjorn managed the trade expeditions. Bjorn had access and opportunity, and apparently secret meetings with rival jarls who might pay handsomely for information about a settlement's vulnerabilities. A settlement running out of food was very vulnerable indeed. Una's face went pale. If you're right, this is treason. If you're wrong, accusing Bjorn? She shook her head. Either way, people die. They stood in the cold storage shed, breath-forming clouds between them. Outside, the village was waking. Smoke rose from longhouses. Children's voices carried on the frozen air, life continuing, oblivious to the rot growing at its center. We need proof, Una finally said. Real proof. Something even Bjorn can't talk his way out of. She looked at Astrid with new eyes. Calculating eyes. Can you watch him? Follow him? You're good at being invisible. Astrid nodded slowly. This was dangerous. If Bjorn caught her, if he even suspected. But what choice did she have? Let the village starve? Let children die while a traitor sold their survival for silver? Be careful, Una warned. Bjorn's not stupid, and he's killed men for less than suspicion. That night, Astrid began her surveillance. She learned Bjorn's patterns. He visited the storage sheds every 3rd night, always after the 2nd watch change. He'd slip inside, remain for perhaps 10 minutes, then emerge and return to his quarters. No guards accompanied him, no witnesses. On the 5th night of watching, Astrid followed him inside. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The shed was dark, lit only by the torch Bjorn carried. She pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing, as he moved deeper into the building. He stopped at the grain barrels, pulled one away from the wall. Behind it, a loose board. He pried it up, revealing a hollow space packed with small leather pouches. He withdrew one, tested its weight, tucked it into his belt, then replaced the board and barrel with practiced efficiency. Silver. He was hoarding silver, selling the settlement's food stores and pocketing the profit while his people slowly starved. Astrid's hands clenched into fists. Rage, hot and sharp, flooded through her. This man ate at Halvard's table, drank Halvard's mead, swore oaths of loyalty while actively destroying them from within. Bjorn turned suddenly. His torch swept the shed. Astrid froze, pressing harder against the wall, praying the shadows would hide her. The light passed inches from her face. Rats, Bjorn muttered. Place is full of them. He left. The door swung shut behind him. Astrid waited until her heart stopped trying to escape her chest, then crept forward. She needed proof. Something tangible. She found the loose board, pried it up with shaking fingers. The silver pouches gleamed in the darkness. She took one, just one, enough to prove what she'd seen. As she tucked it into her dress, a sound made her freeze. Footsteps, coming back. "Forgot my damn knife." Bjorn's voice, closer now. No time to replace the board. No time to hide. The door swung open. Torchlight flooded the shed. Their eyes met. For one eternal second, neither moved. Then Bjorn's face twisted into something murderous. His hand went to his belt, closing around the blade there. "You!" he snarled, stepping forward. "You stupid, mute little—" Astrid ran, burst through the door, and into the night. Behind her, Bjorn's roar of fury split the air. Heavy footsteps pounded after her. She dodged between buildings, her lungs burning, the silver pouch bouncing against her ribs. She had to reach the longhouse, had to reach Halvard, had to— A hand grabbed her dress, yanking her backward. She stumbled, falling, hard onto frozen ground that drove the air from her lungs. Bjorn loomed over her, knife gleaming in the moonlight. "Thought you were clever, didn't you?" he hissed, raising the blade. "Silent little spy, but dead women tell no tales." The knife descended. A hand caught his wrist. Halvard, drunk and swaying. But there. "What?" he slurred. "Are you doing with my wife?" Bjorn's face went from murderous to carefully neutral in the span of a heartbeat. He lowered the knife slowly, his jaw working as he assembled an explanation. "Jarl, I found this thrall sneaking around the storage sheds. Thought she was stealing." "She's not a thrall," Halvard said. His words slurred, but his eyes surprisingly sharp. "Not anymore." He swayed slightly, gripping a support post to steady himself. "And what exactly would my wife steal? Grain? Salted fish?" A bitter laugh escaped him. "She has access to everything in this settlement now. Comes with the ring." Astrid scrambled to her feet, her dress torn at the shoulder, knees scraped raw through the fabric. The silver pouch pressed against her ribs like a burning coal. She had to show it to Halvard, had to make him understand. But how? How did you explain conspiracy and theft and treason without a voice? "Perhaps she's confused," Bjorn offered, sheathing his knife with deliberate calm. "Simple-minded girl, elevated beyond her understanding, wandering where she shouldn't. I merely sought to redirect her." His scarred face arranged itself into something resembling concern. "Forgive me, Jarl, I overreacted. You pulled a knife on her." Halvard's voice hardened slightly, cutting through the drunken haze. "That's more than redirection, old friend." The emphasis on old friend held a warning. Bjorn heard it, his shoulders tensed. "You're right. The late hour, the shadows. I mistook the situation." He turned to Astrid, and the hatred in his eyes was so pure it made her breath catch. "My apologies, lady." The title sounded like an insult in his mouth. Halvard gestured toward the longhouse. "Go, both of you. It's too damn cold to be having this conversation outside." He stumbled slightly, caught himself. "And someone bring me more ale. My head's starting to clear and I don't like what I'm thinking." They walked back in tense silence. Astrid's mind raced. The silver pouch felt impossibly heavy. Should she reveal it now? In front of Bjorn, who could spin any story, who had Halvard's trust earned over decades of service? Or wait for a private moment that might never come? Inside the longhouse, a few people still lingered near the dying fire. Ingrid among them, her eyes narrowing as she saw Astrid's torn dress and scraped knees. A small smile played at her lips. Watching Astrid brought low clearly pleased her. Halvard dropped into his chair with a groan. "Explain." Bjorn spoke first. "As I said, I found her." Halvard held up a hand. "I wasn't asking you." He looked at Astrid. "Well, what were you doing out there?" She stood, frozen. Every eye in the hall fixed on her. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She reached into her dress, fingers closing around the leather pouch. Pulled it out, held it up. The firelight caught the silver, making it gleam. Halvard's eyebrows rose. "What's that?" She stepped forward, opened the pouch. Silver coins spilled onto the table between them. At least 20, maybe more. A fortune. Far more than any thrall or even most carls would see in a year. Where did you get that? Halvard's voice had gone very quiet. Astrid pointed at Bjorn, then at the storage sheds, made a gesture of hiding, then taking. She's lying, Bjorn said instantly, but there was a tightness around his eyes. Trying to deflect from her own theft. She probably stole that from somewhere in the longhouse. My quarters, perhaps. And now accuses me to save herself. Halvard stared at the silver. His fingers traced one of the coins, turning it over. These are marked, he said slowly. Trade coins from the Ragnarssons. Territory. He looked up at Bjorn. Why would my wife have Ragnarsson silver? Why would I? Bjorn countered. If I were stealing, would I be stupid enough to use marked coins? Maybe you thought no one would notice, Ingrid interjected. All eyes turned to her. She stood near the fire, arms crossed. Or maybe you didn't care. You've been meeting with them, haven't you? The Western Jarls. I've heard the rumors. Bjorn's face darkened. Rumors spread by small-minded people with nothing better to do than invent drama. Una. Halvard's voice cut through the rising tension. The cook looked up from where she'd been trying to disappear into the shadows. Come here. Una approached reluctantly, wringing her hands. The winter stores, Halvard said. How are they? Una's face went pale. She glanced at Astrid, then at Bjorn, then at the floor. They're concerning, Jarl. Concerning how? Lower than they should be. Significantly lower. I've been rationing for 2 weeks, but if we don't get supplies soon. She trailed off, the implication clear. Halvard's jaw tightened. He turned back to Bjorn. And you, as master of stores, you've noticed nothing amiss? The winter's been harder than expected, Bjorn said smoothly. People eat more when it's cold. We've had more visitors than usual. The calculations were off from the start. Or someone's been selling our food to the Ragnarssons, Ingrid said quietly, weakening us from within, making us dependent. So when spring comes and they decide to push their borders, we're too starved to resist. The hall had gone deadly silent. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Bjorn laughed. It sounded forced. This is ridiculous. You're going to believe a mute thrall and paranoid gossip over me? Over 30 years of loyal service? 30 years, Halvard agreed. Which is why I'm not having you executed where you stand. He stood, swaying only slightly. The alcohol seemed to have burned off, leaving behind something cold and sharp. But I'm also not a fool. Una, tomorrow at dawn, full inventory of all stores. Every grain of wheat, every strip of dried meat, everything. Record it all. Yes, Jarl. Bjorn, you're confined to quarters until the inventory is complete. If the numbers match what they should be, you have my apology. If they don't, he left the threat hanging. Bjorn's hands clenched into fists. You can't, seriously. I can. I am. Halvard's voice brooked no argument. If you're innocent, you have nothing to fear. Consider it a precaution. Two carls stepped forward, hands on their sword hilts, not drawn, not yet, but ready. Bjorn looked around the hall, saw no allies, no one willing to speak for him. His gaze landed on Astrid, and the promise in his eyes made her blood run cold. This wasn't over, not even close. As you command, Jarl, he said through gritted teeth. He turned and walked toward his quarters, the two carls following at a discreet distance. When he was gone, Halvard sank back into his chair. Suddenly he looked old, tired. If this is true, he said to no one in particular. If Bjorn's been... He couldn't finish the sentence. Ingrid moved closer. Father, we need to prepare. If the Ragnarssons think we're weak... I know. He rubbed his face with both hands. Gods, I know. He looked at Astrid, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since the wedding. You did this. You found the proof. She nodded. Why? The question seemed genuine, confused. You're nobody. Nothing. Why would you risk your life for this settlement? These people treat you like dirt. Astrid met his gaze, held it. She couldn't answer with words, but maybe he'd understand anyway. Because what was the alternative? Watch everyone starve? Watch children die? She'd already watched her family butchered. She wouldn't watch it happen again, not if she could stop it. Something shifted in Halvard's expression. Respect, maybe, or confusion, or both. Go, he said finally. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be... He shook his head. Just go. Astrid walked toward their shared chamber, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the wall for support. Behind her, voices rose in urgent discussion, plans being made, defenses considered. She'd set something in motion tonight that couldn't be stopped. In the chamber, she collapsed onto the bed. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She'd confronted a traitor, nearly died, changed everything. And tomorrow, when the inventory proved her right, when Bjorn's treachery became undeniable, what then? Would Halvard thank her? Punish her for causing turmoil? Would Bjorn find a way to exact revenge even from confinement? The door opened. Halvard entered, moving more steadily now. He looked at her for a long moment. That dress is ruined, he said finally. I'll have another brought. He paused. My first wife. She never would have done what you did tonight. Too afraid of making waves, of being improper. A strange sound escaped him. Almost a laugh. Maybe I chose better than I thought. He lay down beside her, still fully clothed. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into sleep. But Astrid lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Bjorn's expression when he'd raised that knife. The hatred, the promise of violence. She'd made a powerful enemy tonight. And enemies, in her experience, always found ways to hurt you. The only question was when. Outside, wind howled through the village. Somewhere, a dog barked. The fire in the great hall crackled and popped. Normal sounds, everyday sounds. But nothing felt normal anymore. Everything had shifted. She was no longer invisible, no longer safely ignored. She'd stepped into the light, and light cast shadows, deep ones, where monsters could hide. The inventory took 3 days. 3 days of Una and her assistants counting every grain, every dried fish, every preserved vegetable in every storage shed. 3 days of the entire settlement holding its breath, waiting for confirmation of what everyone already suspected. Astrid spent those days in a strange limbo. People stared at her now, not with contempt or dismissal, but with something else. Curiosity, uncertainty. A mute thrall had accused the Jarl's most trusted warrior of treason. Either she was brave or foolish, maybe both. She returned to the kitchens, seeking the familiar rhythm of work. But even there, things had changed. The other thralls whispered when they thought she wasn't listening, about her, about what she'd done, about how she'd nearly died and somehow lived. They say Bjorn would have killed her right there if the Jarl hadn't stumbled out drunk, one girl murmured while scrubbing pots. Say the knife was at her throat. The gods protected her, another insisted. Had to be divine intervention. Astrid kept her head down, grinding herbs with more force than necessary. No gods had saved her. Just luck. Terrible random luck that Halvard had chosen that precise moment to emerge from. The longhouse. Nothing more. But people needed their stories, their explanations, their reasons why the world worked the way it did. On the second day, Ingrid found her in the weaving room. Astrid had been trying to repair her torn dress, her stitches clumsy and uneven. She'd never learned proper needlework. Thralls weren't taught such refinements. You're making a mess of that, Ingrid observed, standing in the doorway. Her voice held none of its usual venom. Instead, she sounded almost tired. Here. She crossed the room and took the needle from Astrid's hands. Watch. For the next hour, Ingrid showed her how to make small, invisible stitches that pulled the torn fabric together seamlessly. Her movements were precise, practiced. The work of someone raised to be a Jarl's wife, trained in all the domestic arts that made a household function. My mother taught me, Ingrid said quietly, not looking up from the fabric. Before she died, she said a woman's worth was in her hands. What she could create, preserve, mend. She tied off the thread with sharp efficiency. I hated those lessons, wanted to learn the sword instead. But she insisted. She handed the dress back to Astrid. "There, it'll hold now." Astrid stared at her, confused by this sudden shift. Where was the hatred, the cruelty? Ingrid seemed to read her thoughts. "Don't mistake this for friendship," she said, her voice hardening slightly. "I still don't think you belong here. Still think my father made a terrible mistake marrying you." She paused. "But what you did with Bjorn, that took courage. Or stupidity. I'm still deciding which." She stood, brushing off her skirts. "Either way, you might have saved us all. So I'm repaying the debt. We're even now." She left before Astrid could react, could try to communicate anything in return. That evening, Una sought her out. The cook's face was grim, lined with new worry. "The count's done," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one else could hear. "We're missing nearly a third of what we should have, enough to feed the entire settlement for 2 months. Gone." Astrid's stomach dropped. She'd known it was bad. Hadn't realized it was catastrophic. "Halvard's calling a thing," Una continued. "Tomorrow at midday. Everyone must attend. He'll announce the findings. Judge Bjorn publicly." She hesitated. "You'll need to be there, as witness." The thing. The assembly where all free people gathered to hear disputes, pass judgment, make laws. Where justice was decided by consensus and tradition. Astrid had never attended one. Thralls weren't permitted. But she wasn't a thrall anymore, was she? The realization hit her like cold water. She'd have to stand before the entire settlement, be seen, be examined, be judged herself in a way. Her legs felt suddenly weak. Una gripped her shoulder. "You can do this. You already did the hard part. This is just confirmation." But confirmation felt harder somehow, because it made everything real. Final. There would be no going back after tomorrow. That night, Halvard came to their chamber earlier than usual. Sober for once. His face looked haggard, aged 10 years in 3 days. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. 30 years, he said to the floor. I've known Bjorn for 30 years. Fought beside him, trusted him with my life, my family's lives. He laughed bitterly, and the whole time he couldn't finish. Astrid sat beside him, didn't touch him, but her presence seemed to register. He looked at her sideways. Do you know what the worst part is? His voice cracked slightly. I should have seen it, should have noticed. But I was too busy drinking, too busy feeling sorry for myself after my wife died, too busy being angry at the world. He rubbed his face roughly. A better Jarl would have caught this before it got so bad. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that Bjorn had been careful, clever, that anyone could have been deceived. But she had. No words, only silence. So she did the only thing she could. She placed her hand on his arm, gentle, brief, a connection. Halvard stared at her hand, then at her face. You're a strange one, he said softly. I chose you to be voiceless, powerless. But somehow you've become... He trailed off, searching for the word. Important, more important than half the Carls in this settlement. He shook his head. I don't understand you. She pulled her hand back. Neither did she, honestly. She'd just been trying to survive, to do what seemed right. Somehow that had led here. Tomorrow's going to be ugly, Halvard warned. Bjorn has friends, loyalists who won't want to believe he betrayed us. They'll fight the judgment, might even call for trial by combat. He met her eyes. If they do, I'll have to fight him myself. Jarl's right. Jarl's duty. The implication was clear. Halvard was older, slower, damaged by years of heavy drinking. Bjorn was in his prime, a legendary warrior. The outcome of such a fight was far from certain. If I fall, Halvard said carefully, Ingrid becomes the settlement's leader until she marries or the Carls choose another Jarl. You'll have no protection then. No status. She'll cast you out, might even re-enslave you out of spite. Astrid nodded. She'd already thought of this, had already accepted it. You could leave now, Halvard offered. Before the thing. Take supplies, head south. Start over somewhere no one knows you. He paused. I wouldn't blame you. She shook her head firmly. Leaving felt like cowardice, like abandoning these people after she'd pulled their world apart. She'd started this. She'd see it through. Something like respect flickered in Halvard's eyes. Brave or foolish, he echoed Ingrid's words. Maybe both. He stood. Get some rest. Tomorrow you'll stand before the entire settlement and confirm what you found. Every eye will be on you, every judgment. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, thank you. For caring when you had no reason to. He left her alone with her thoughts. Sleep didn't come. Astrid lay in the darkness, listening to the settlement's night sounds. Somewhere, a baby cried. Dogs barked at shadows. The wind rattled shutters with skeletal fingers. She thought about tomorrow, about standing in the thing circle with everyone watching, about Bjorn's face when judgment was passed, about the possibility of violence, of death, of everything spiraling beyond anyone's control. She thought about her family. Dead 13 years now. Would they be proud of what she'd become? Or ashamed that she'd survived when they hadn't? The bone ring on her finger caught a sliver of moonlight. Too large. Always slipping. A dead woman's ring on a living woman's hand. A symbol of everything wrong and strange about her life now. But it was her life. She'd chosen to nod at that wedding. Chosen to investigate the missing stores. Chosen to confront Bjorn. Every choice leading to this moment. Dawn came. Too quickly. Gray light filtered through gaps in the shutters, turning everything colorless and cold. Astrid rose, dressed carefully in the mended dress, combed her hair with trembling fingers. The face staring back from the polished bronze mirror looked pale, frightened. Young. She was only 19 winters. Most girls her age were just starting their lives, learning trades, courting, planning futures. She was about to potentially destroy a man's life, or be destroyed trying. The longhouse was already stirring. People moved with unusual purpose, preparing for the thing. This wasn't a routine assembly. This was history being made. Una pressed bread and cheese into her hands. Eat, you'll need your strength. The food tasted like ashes. Astrid forced it down anyway. Outside, people gathered in the great circle near the center of the settlement. The thing stone stood at its heart, ancient and weathered, carved with runes no one could read anymore. Generations of judgments had been passed. Here, generations of fates decided. Now it was her turn. Halvard emerged from the longhouse dressed in his finest. Red tunic with gold embroidery, silver arm rings polished to gleaming, the Jarl's torque around his neck, heavy with authority and responsibility. He looked every inch the leader, but his eyes found Astrid's, and in them she saw fear matching her own. They walked together toward the circle, toward whatever came next. Bjorn was already there, flanked by guards. His hands were bound, but his head was high, defiant, unbroken. When he saw Astrid, his lips curled into something that might have been a smile or a promise. The entire settlement formed rings around them. Hundreds of people, every face turned their direction, waiting. Halvard raised his hand. Silence fell like a hammer. "We gather for judgment," he announced, his voice carrying across the frozen ground. "Accusations have been made, evidence gathered. Truth will be revealed here, before gods and community, as is our way." He turned to Astrid. "Step forward, witness. Show us what you found." Her legs barely held her, but she stepped forward, into the center of the circle, into history, into a future she couldn't predict. Every eye fixed on her, judging, waiting, wondering what a mute girl could possibly prove. Astrid stood in the center of the thing circle, surrounded by hundreds of faces. The weight of their attention pressed down on her like physical force, crushing the air from her lungs. Her hands shook. She clenched them into fists, nails biting into palms, using pain to anchor herself. Halvard gestured to Una. "Present the findings." The cook stepped forward, clutching a piece of parchment covered in careful tallies. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied. The winter stores, as counted over 3 days by myself and 4 witnesses, show significant losses. Grain, 62 barrels short. Salted fish, 43 barrels. Preserved meats, 117 pieces. Dried vegetables, 38 sacks. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. Total loss equals approximately 2 months of full rations for the entire settlement. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Shock, anger, fear. 2 months of food gone meant starvation was no longer a distant possibility, but an approaching certainty. "Impossible," Bjorn called out, his voice strong despite his bound hands. "Those numbers are wrong. I kept careful records." Una must have miscounted. 4 witnesses, Una repeated, her voice sharper now. 4 separate counts over 3 days, all matched. The numbers are accurate. Then there's been waste, Bjorn countered smoothly. Spoilage, rats, poor storage techniques, any number of natural explanations. He looked around the circle, appealing to the crowd. Are we really going to ruin a man's reputation over speculation and paranoia? Show them, Halvard said quietly to Astrid. She reached into her dress and withdrew the leather pouch, moved to the thingstone and upended it. Silver coins spilled across the ancient rock, glittering in the weak winter sunlight. The marked coins, the Ragnarsson's silver. This was found hidden in the storage shed, Halvard announced, behind a loose board, along with 6 other pouches just like it. He picked up one of the coins, holding it high. Trade silver from the Western Territories. Our enemies. Hidden in our stores by someone with access. By someone who wanted to frame me, Bjorn shot back. Anyone could have planted that silver. Anyone with a grudge. Anyone wanting to remove me from power. His eyes found Astrid. Anyone with something to gain from my fall. You claim the mute girl orchestrated this? Old Torsten, the goatee, spoke from the edge of the circle. His weathered face was skeptical. A thrall with no voice, no allies, no resources somehow obtained Ragnarsson's silver, hid it in your storage shed, then convinced the Jarl's wife to discover it at the perfect moment. That's your defense. She's not as simple as she appears, Bjorn said. There was something dangerous in his voice now, desperate. I've watched her, moving through the longhouse like a ghost, listening, always listening. Who knows what schemes she's capable of? Schemes that require her to risk her own life? Ingrid's voice cut through the murmurs. She stepped into the circle, her black dress stark against the snow. I was there that night. I saw Bjorn with a knife at her throat. If my father hadn't intervened, she'd be dead. She turned to face Bjorn directly. Why would she provoke you to murder if this was all fabrication? What possible advantage? Bjorn's jaw worked. No good answer existed for that question. I have more, Halvard said. He gestured, and 2 carls dragged forward a thin man Astrid recognized as a trader who'd visited the settlement twice that winter. The man's face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. He'd been questioned, harshly. Tell them, Halvard commanded. The trader's voice came out broken, defeated. I bought grain and fish and meat from him. He nodded toward Bjorn. 3 times this winter. Paid good silver. Ragnarsson's silver like he asked. Said it was surplus, that the settlement had plenty. He's lying, Bjorn snarled. They tortured him, made him say whatever they wanted. We didn't touch him, one of the carls said flatly. He looked like this when we found him. Seems the Ragnarssons don't like loose ends. Beat him nearly to death, then left him in a ditch to freeze. We found him yesterday, more dead than alive. The trader nodded miserably. They said if I talked, they'd kill my family. But they're going to kill us anyway, aren't they? Once the spring comes and this settlement's too weak to resist their expansion. He started weeping. I didn't know. Didn't realize he was stealing from his own people. Thought it was legitimate trade. The crowd's murmur turned ugly, angry. People pressed closer, their faces twisted with betrayal and rage. Bjorn had been one of them, trusted, respected, and he'd sold them out for silver. Trial by combat, Bjorn called out suddenly, his voice cutting through the rising fury. "I invoke my right. Let the gods decide my guilt or innocence through trial by combat." Silence fell. It was his right, under the old laws. Any man accused could demand trial by combat. If he won, he was judged innocent regardless of evidence. If he lost, guilt was confirmed and punishment swift. Halvard's face went pale. "You invoke trial by combat against your Jarl? Against the man you've served for 30 years? "I invoke it against whoever accuses me," Bjorn said. His eyes swept the circle and landed on Astrid. "Against her, the witness. Let her defend her accusations with steel." Horror flooded through Astrid. Her knees nearly buckled. Fight Bjorn. She'd never held a sword in her life. Had no training, no skill, no chance. It would be murder, not trial. "Absolutely not," Halvard said flatly. "She's a woman. Unarmed, untrained. You'd slaughter her in seconds. Then let her champion fight for her," Bjorn countered. "That's also permitted. Let someone defend her accusations, if they believe in them so strongly." The trap snapped shut. Astrid could see it in Bjorn's eyes. If no one stepped forward to champion her, the accusations would be dismissed. Bjorn would go free, probably with compensation for false accusation. But who would fight him? Who would risk death for a mute thrall elevated above her? "Station? I'll fight him." Halvard's voice rang out clear and strong. "No." Ingrid grabbed her father's arm. "You can't. You haven't trained properly in years. He'll kill you." "Then I'll die defending what's right," Halvard said simply. He shook off her grip and stepped forward. "I accept the challenge as her champion. Tomorrow at dawn. To the death or submission." Bjorn smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd already won. "To the death, old friend. Let's not insult each other." With half measures. The thing dissolved into chaos. People shouting, arguing, some supporting Halvard's courage, others muttering that he was too old, too broken by drink, that Bjorn would destroy him, that the settlement would lose both traitor and Jarl in one bloody morning. Astrid stood frozen in the center of it all. This was her fault. She'd started this chain of events, and now Halvard would die because of it. Ingrid's face was ashen. "You've killed him," she hissed at Astrid as she passed. "My father will die tomorrow because of your accusations. I hope you're satisfied." The crowd began to disperse. Halvard was immediately surrounded by carls, advisors, people offering strategies and encouragement. He caught Astrid's eye over their heads. He didn't look afraid. He looked determined. Resigned, maybe, but not afraid. Una found her as she stood alone by the thing stone. "Come," the cook said gently. "You can't stay here." Astrid let herself be led away. Her mind felt disconnected from her body, floating. Everything had gone so wrong so fast. She'd thought truth would be enough. Justice would prevail. But justice, she was learning, was more complicated than truth, more violent, more costly. That night, she couldn't eat, couldn't rest. She paced the chamber like a caged animal while Halvard sat calmly sharpening his sword. The rasp of stone on steel filled the silence between them. "Stop worrying," he said without looking up. "What happens, happens. The gods will decide." But Astrid didn't believe in gods. Hadn't since she'd prayed desperately in that root cellar 13 years ago and no one came to save her family. Gods were stories people told themselves to make sense of senseless things. Halvard set down the sword and whetstone, looked at her properly. "You did the right thing. You know that, yes? Even if I die tomorrow, you did the right thing. This settlement needed to know what Bjorn was doing, needed to stop him before we all starved." She shook her head violently. Right thing, wrong method, right intention, catastrophic result. Her throat felt too tight. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she forced them back. Crying solved nothing. "Come here." Halvard's voice was surprisingly gentle. She approached hesitantly. He took her hand, the one wearing the bone ring. His thumb traced the carved runes. My first wife made this. Did you know that? Carved it herself from a whalebone I brought back from a raid when I was young and stupid. And thought violence was glory. He smiled sadly. She told me the runes were protection, that whoever wore it would be safe from harm. I told her that was foolish superstition. He released her hand. She died wearing it. So much for protection. Astrid stared at the ring. She'd thought it just a token, something given without thought or meaning, but it carried history, memory, love, maybe, of a sort. She would have liked you, Halvard continued. She always championed the weak, fed beggars when we could barely feed ourselves, took in orphans, drove me mad with her softness. His voice caught, but she was good, truly good, something I've never managed to be. He met Astrid's eyes. You remind me of her, that same stubborn goodness that won't look away from suffering. He stood, picked up his sword, tested its weight. I'm going to try very hard not to die tomorrow. But if I do, know this. You gave me something these last weeks. Purpose. A reason to be better than the drunk I'd become. Whatever happens, I'm grateful for that. Before Astrid could react, he'd left the chamber, going to prepare. To pray, maybe, though he'd never seemed the religious type. To make peace with whatever tomorrow brought. She was alone. Again. Always alone. Even surrounded by people. She touched the ring, felt the smooth bone, the careful carving. Protection that hadn't protected. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was that someone had cared enough to try, to offer what comfort they could in a world that offered so little. Tomorrow Halvard would fight, might die. Because she'd been too moral, too stubborn, too good, as he'd said. Was goodness worth death? Worth watching another person she'd started to care about destroyed? She didn't know. Didn't have answers. Only questions that cut like knives. Outside, the settlement prepared. Weapons were sharpened. The combat ground was cleared. People placed bets on the outcome, because people always found ways to profit from tragedy. And somewhere, Bjorn was probably smiling. Because even if he died tomorrow, he'd take Halvard with him. Would leave the settlement leaderless and vulnerable. The Ragnarsons would sweep in come spring and claim everything. Maybe he'd already won. Maybe they'd all already lost. Dawn broke blood red across the horizon. Astrid stood at the chamber window, watching color seep into the gray world like a wound opening. Her hands gripped the sill so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Behind her, the bed lay empty. Halvard had never returned. The combat ground was already crowded when she emerged. The entire settlement had gathered, pressed shoulder to shoulder in a circle around the marked fighting space. Their breath formed clouds in the frozen air, hundreds of small ghosts rising toward a sky that promised nothing but cold indifference. Halvard stood at one end of the circle. He'd stripped to his tunic despite the bitter cold, his sword hanging loose in his right hand. His face was calm, too calm, the face of a man who'd already accepted death and made his peace with it. Bjorn waited at the opposite end. He wore no shirt at all, his scarred torso a map of past battles. His muscles were still hard, still powerful. He looked like what he was, a warrior in his prime facing a man 20 years past his. The betting had been fierce, Una had whispered earlier. 10-1 odds favoring Bjorn. No one believed Halvard could win. They'd come to watch their Jarl die with whatever dignity he could muster. Torsten stepped into the center, his staff planted firmly in the frozen earth. We gather to witness trial by combat. Bjorn Skarson stands accused of theft, treason, and betrayal of his Jarl and people. Halvard Eriksson stands as champion for the witness who brought these accusations. His voice carried across the assembled crowd. The combat is to the death. No quarter asked or given. May the gods judge truly. He withdrew to the circle's edge. For a long moment, neither man moved. They simply stared at each other across the distance. 30 years of friendship, of brotherhood forged in battle, of shared ale and shared losses. All of it ending here, in blood on frozen ground. I'm sorry it came to this, Halvard said quietly. But in the utter silence, Everyone heard. "I'm not," Bjorn replied. "You've grown weak, old friend. This settlement needs strength, not a drunk who married a thrall and calls it leadership. Then prove your strength." Halvard raised his sword. "Come kill me!" Bjorn charged. The sound of steel meeting steel rang out like a bell. Halvard blocked the first strike, barely, the impact driving him back 3 steps. Bjorn pressed the advantage, raining blows that came so fast they blurred together. Halvard's blade moved in desperate parries, each block sending shocks up his arms, visible even from where Astrid stood. He's going to lose, she thought. The certainty sat in her stomach like ice. He's going to die, and it's my fault. Bjorn's sword slipped past Halvard's guard and opened a line across his ribs. Blood bloomed against the tunic, spreading dark and wet. The crowd gasped. First blood. It had taken less than 30 seconds. Halvard stumbled back, pressing his free hand against the wound. His face had gone pale, but his sword didn't waver. "Yield," Bjorn called out. "I'll make it quick, for old time's sake." "No." Halvard's voice was steady despite the pain. "Not until one of us is dead." They circled each other. Bjorn moved. Like a wolf, balanced and deadly. Halvard limped slightly, favoring his wounded side. Every breath seemed to cost him. The second exchange was worse. Bjorn's blade found Halvard's left shoulder, cutting deep. The Jarl's offhand dropped, useless. He could barely hold his sword with his right. Blood ran down his arm, dripping from his fingertips to steam against the frozen ground. Astrid couldn't watch, couldn't look away. Her heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Around her, the crowd had gone silent. Even those who'd bet on Bjorn seemed uncomfortable now. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. "I trained you," Bjorn said, breathing hard. "Taught you everything you know about the sword. Did you really think you could beat me?" "No," Halvard smiled through bloody teeth. "But I thought I could make you work for it." He attacked. A desperate wild swing that had no chance of landing. Bjorn sidestepped easily, his counter-strike aimed at Halvard's neck. A killing blow. But Halvard had never intended to connect. The swing was a feint. As Bjorn moved to dodge, Halvard dropped his sword and grabbed. His right hand closed around Bjorn's wrist. His weight, all of it, pulled them both down. They hit the ground hard. Bjorn's sword flew from his grip, skittering across ice-hard earth. For a moment they grappled, rolling, punching, biting like animals. Blood from Halvard's wounds painted them both crimson. Bjorn was stronger, younger. He managed to pin Halvard, hands closing around his throat. Halvard's face went purple, his legs kicked weakly. His fingers clawed at Bjorn's wrists but couldn't break the grip. This was it. The end. Astrid's vision tunneled. Her breath came in short, desperate gasps. Do something. Do anything. But what could she do? She had no voice to scream, no weapon to throw, no power to stop this. Halvard's hand scrabbled across the ground, searching. His fingers found a rock, fist-sized and jagged. With the last of his strength, he brought it up and smashed it into Bjorn's temple, once, twice, 3 times. Bjorn's grip loosened. His eyes went unfocused. He toppled sideways, blood running from his shattered skull. Halvard rolled away, gasping, coughing, his throat bruised purple. He couldn't stand, could barely move, but Bjorn wasn't moving at all. Torsten approached cautiously, checked Bjorn's pulse, looked up at the crowd. Bjorn Skarsen is dead. The gods have judged. The accusations are proven true. The silence broke. People surged forward, some to help Halvard, others to stare at Bjorn's body. The man who'd betrayed them all, finally brought low. Astrid pushed through the crowd, dropped to her knees beside Halvard. His eyes found hers, and he tried to smile. It came out as a grimace. "Told you," he wheezed. "Didn't die." Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. The next hours passed in a blur. Halvard was carried to the longhouse. Una and the settlement's healer worked frantically to stop the bleeding, to stitch wounds, to force healing herbs down his throat. He'd lost so much blood the rushes beneath him were soaked crimson. Will he live? Ingrid's voice was tight with fear. The healer, an old woman with milky eyes, shrugged. Maybe, if infection doesn't set in, if his will is strong enough. She looked at Ingrid. You should prepare yourself either way. Astrid sat in the corner, making herself small, invisible, watching Halvard's chest rise and fall with labored breaths. Each one sounded like, it might be his last. This was her doing, her righteousness. Her need to expose evil had brought them here, had nearly killed a man who'd shown her unexpected kindness, who'd defended her when he had every reason not to. You should rest, Una said gently, appearing beside her. You've been here all day. There's nothing more you can do. But leaving felt like abandonment, like giving up. So Astrid stayed. Night fell. The longhouse grew quiet. Most people had returned to their homes, to their lives. Halvard lay in his bed, pale as snow, his breathing shallow. The healer had done everything she could. Now it was just waiting. Ingrid sat on the opposite side of the bed, holding her father's hand. Her face was blank, carefully controlled, but her eyes were red-rimmed. He was a fool, she said quietly, not to Astrid specifically, just to the room. A drunk, a terrible leader these past years. But he was my father, and he tried. Gods, he tried. Astrid wanted to say something, wanted to offer comfort, but she had no words. Never had, never would. Do you know what he told me last night? Ingrid continued. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He said marrying you was the best mistake he'd ever made, that you reminded him what it meant to care about something beyond yourself. She laughed bitterly. A thrall, a mute thrall, and she became his redemption. A sound from the bed. Halvard's eyes fluttered open. His hand moved weakly, searching. Astrid took it without thinking. His grip was feeble but present. Still here, he whispered. His voice was wrecked, his throat bruised. Both of you. Good. Don't talk, Ingrid commanded. Save your strength. For what? More drinking? He smiled slightly. I'm done with that. Done being less than I should be. His eyes found Astrid's. You saved us. This settlement. These people. They don't all understand yet, but they will. Father. Hush, daughter. His hand squeezed Astrid's weakly. Promise me something, both of you. No. More fighting. No more hate. This settlement needs unity, needs strength. His breathing rattled. Work together, please. Ingrid's face crumpled. You're not dying. You can't. I need you. Everyone dies eventually. Halvard's eyes drifted closed. Just try to be better than I was. Shouldn't be hard. His grip loosened. His breathing deepened. Sleep, not death. But close enough to the edge that the difference hardly mattered. The healer checked his wounds, changed bandages, forced more. Medicine between his lips. Next 3 days are critical, she said. If he makes it that long, he might survive. Might, not will. The uncertainty hung heavy in the air. Astrid stayed through the night, watching Halvard breathe, counting each rise and fall of his chest like precious coins, praying to gods she didn't believe in that he'd live, that her actions wouldn't cost another person she'd started to care about. Dawn came again. Halvard still lived, still breathed. Small victories. Ingrid, left to manage the settlement's affairs. Someone had to lead. Someone had to make decisions. Bjorn's body had been burned on a pyre at sunset, his ashes scattered without ceremony or honor. Traitors deserved no better. Una brought food Astrid couldn't eat, mead she couldn't drink. You need to keep your strength up, the cook insisted. He's going to live. I feel it, and when he wakes, he'll need you. Empty reassurances, but Astrid nodded anyway. Let Una believe she was comforted. Alone again. With Halvard's struggling breaths, Astrid touched the bone ring on her finger. Protection that hadn't protected, love that hadn't saved. But symbols, she was learning, mattered less than actions, less than choices, less than the stubborn decision to keep trying even when everything seemed hopeless. Halvard had tried, had fought, had defended what was right at terrible cost to himself. The least she could do was witness his struggle, stay beside him, let him know, if he could know anything in his fevered unconsciousness, that he wasn't alone. Outside, the settlement stirred to life. Inside, Astrid kept her vigil, waiting, hoping, fearing. All she could do. 6 days passed before Halvard's fever broke. 6 days of delirium and night terrors, of wounds seeping infection that the healer fought with every herb and poultice she knew. 6 days of Astrid and Ingrid taking turns at his bedside, an unspoken truce forming between them in the space of shared fear. On the 7th morning, Halvard opened his eyes, clear eyes, focused eyes. He looked at Astrid sitting in her usual corner and croaked, "Water." She nearly knocked over the chair, rushing to bring him a cup. Her hands shook so badly half the water sloshed onto the floor, but she managed to hold it to his lips, supporting his head while he drank. "Thank you," he whispered. 2 words, but they carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Ingrid burst into the chamber moments later, summoned by a thrall who'd witnessed Halvard waking. She stopped in the doorway, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "Father, still alive." Halvard's smile was weak but genuine. "Disappointing, I'm sure. You're an idiot." Ingrid crossed the room and gripped his hand. "A reckless, foolish idiot who nearly got himself killed over a trial you should never have accepted." "Probably," Halvard agreed. "But I won, so maybe not completely foolish." Over the next week, his strength slowly returned. He could sit up without help, could eat solid food, could walk a few steps before exhaustion forced him back to bed. The healer declared him past immediate danger, though the shoulder wound would never fully heal. His left arm would always be weaker, his movements limited. "A small price," Halvard said when Ingrid fretted over it. "I'm alive. That's more than I deserved." The settlement gradually returned to normal rhythms. New leadership was established for the guard, someone younger and loyal, whom everyone trusted. The winter. Stores were carefully rationed under Una's watchful eye. They'd make it to spring. Barely, but they'd survive. Traders arrived one afternoon, not from the Ragnarsson's territory, but from settlements to the east. They brought grain to trade, salted meat, precious supplies that eased the desperate scarcity. Word had spread about Bjorn's betrayal and execution, about Halvard's near-death in combat, about the settlement's vulnerability, but instead of predators circling, allies had appeared, offering trade, offering support, strengthening bonds. "Seems your victory impressed people," Ingrid told her father. "Showed strength instead of weakness. The other Jarls are reconsidering their positions. Some are even suggesting a defensive alliance against the Ragnarssons." Halvard nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Maybe something positive will come from this mess after all." Spring arrived suddenly, as it always did in the north. One morning the world was frozen and dead. The next, ice cracked in the fjord, and green things pushed through thawing earth. Life returning. Persistent. Stubborn. Halvard called Astrid to the great hall one afternoon. He sat in his chair, still moving carefully, but looking more like himself than he had in weeks. Ingrid stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "Sit," Halvard commanded, gesturing to a bench. Astrid sat, her heart hammering. This felt formal, important, possibly terrible. "I've been thinking," Halvard began, "about our marriage, about what it's become, what it was supposed to be." He paused, choosing words carefully. "I married you to have a voiceless wife, someone who couldn't question or challenge me, someone powerless." Her stomach dropped. He was ending it, sending her away. She'd known this was coming, had prepared herself, but preparation didn't stop the hollow ache spreading through her chest. "But you've proven," he continued, "that voice and power have nothing to do with speech. You've shown more courage, more integrity, more leadership than most of the Carls in this settlement, including me, for too many years." He leaned forward. "So I'm giving you a choice, a real choice this time." Astrid's breath caught. "You can stay as my wife," Halvard said. "We'll make it a true marriage, partnership, equals working together to lead this settlement. Or, he paused, I'll grant you freedom. Full freedom. Land of your own, resources to start fresh wherever you choose. No obligations, no expectations. A clean break from everything that's happened here. The silence stretched. Every eye in the hall had turned toward them. This was witnessed. Official. Whatever she chose would bind them all. She can't answer. Someone muttered from the back. How's she supposed to? Astrid stood, walked to where Halvard sat. She pulled the bone ring from her finger, the ring that had always been too large, the ring that carried a dead woman's love and failed protection. She looked at it, then at Halvard, then, very deliberately, she placed it back on her finger. A choice, clear as speaking. Something shifted in Halvard's expression. Relief, gratitude, maybe even affection, though calling it love would be too much, too soon. They barely knew each other. But foundations existed. Respect, understanding, shared experience of survival. Then it's settled, Halvard announced to the hall. Astrid remains as my wife and partner. Her voice carries the same weight as mine in all matters concerning this settlement. He raised his voice. Let any who doubt her authority answer to me. No one doubted. Not after what she'd done, what she'd survived. The weeks that followed brought changes, gradual ones. Astrid began attending council meetings, sitting beside Halvard as decisions were made. She couldn't speak, but she'd learned to communicate. Gestures, drawings, expressions. People learned to read her, to wait for her input, to value her silence as much as others' words. Ingrid, surprisingly, became something like a friend, or at least an ally. You're insufferable, she told Astrid one afternoon while teaching her proper embroidery. Stubborn and idealistic and completely impossible to hate no matter how hard I try. She yanked a stitch tight with unnecessary force. My father's happier than I've seen him in years. He stopped drinking so much, started leading properly again. Because of you. Astrid shook her head, not because of her, because of himself. She'd just been the catalyst. Don't argue, Ingrid said. Just thank you for giving me my father back. Summer came. The fields turned green. Crops grew. Children played in sunshine that lasted almost all day. Life continued with its endless, beautiful persistence. One evening, Astrid and Halvard walked along the fjord. He moved slowly, still favoring his wounded side but improving daily. The water reflected the endless twilight, turning everything silver and gold. Do you ever wish you could speak? Halvard asked suddenly. Tell people what? You're thinking without barriers? Astrid considered, then shook her head. Her silence had become her strength, her shield, her weapon when needed. Why would she give that up? I suppose I understand that, Halvard said. We all have our armor, our ways of protecting ourselves. He stopped walking, turned to face her. But sometimes, just with me, do you think you could try? Her heart stuttered. He wasn't asking for words. He was asking for trust, for vulnerability, for her to lower her defenses, if only for a moment. She opened her mouth. The sound that emerged was rusty, uncertain, barely audible. A whisper that had been locked away for 13 years. Thank you. 2 words. The same words he'd spoken to her when he'd first woken after the combat. But coming from her, they meant everything. Meant trust. Meant acceptance. Meant willingness to be seen. Halvard's eyes widened. For a moment he couldn't speak. Then he smiled, genuine and warm. You're welcome, he said softly. For whatever I did to earn your trust, though I'm not sure I deserve it. You do, she whispered. The words felt strange in her mouth. Foreign, but also right. True. They stood in the twilight, 2 broken people who'd somehow found wholeness in each other's company. Not through romance or passion, but through mutual respect. Through surviving darkness together. Through choosing again and again to be better than their circumstances demanded. Will you speak again? Halvard asked. Or was that just for me? Astrid smiled, shook her head. Her silence was still her armor, still her power. But now Halvard knew the truth, knew she could speak if she chose, knew she trusted him with that secret. It was enough. They walked back to the settlement as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new struggles, but they'd face them together. Leader and partner, Jarl and wife. Two people who'd learned that strength came not from voice or violence, but from the stubborn courage to do what was right even when the cost seemed too high. In the longhouse that night, Astrid lay beside Halvard listening to his steady breathing. The bone ring on her finger caught moonlight, protection that had failed once but might yet succeed. Love that had died but could grow again in new forms. She'd started as nothing. Property. Invisible. Powerless. She'd become something more. Not through magic or miracle, but through choice. Through refusing to, look away from injustice. Through risking everything for people who'd given her nothing. The settlement slept around her. Safe. Fed. Protected. Not perfect. Never perfect. But alive. Surviving. Growing. And she'd helped make that possible. A mute thrall who'd learned that silence could speak louder than any words. That invisible didn't mean powerless. That sometimes the bravest thing was simply refusing to accept the role others assigned you. Tomorrow the sun would rise. Work would continue. Life would persist with its endless complications and small joys. But tonight, in this moment, Astrid allowed herself something rare, something precious. Peace. Astrid's journey teaches us that power isn't found in the loudest voice or the sharpest sword. It lives in the quiet courage to stand up when everything tells you to stay down, to care when caring could cost you everything, to choose what's right even when the price seems unbearable. She was invisible, voiceless, powerless by every measure that mattered to her world. And yet, she changed everything, because she refused to accept that silence meant surrender. Ask yourself, would you have stayed quiet? Would you have risked your life for people who saw you as nothing? When the knife was at your throat and death felt certain, would you still believe that doing the right thing mattered? Astrid did. Not because she was fearless, but because she understood something most of us forget. We're not defined by what's taken from us, but by what we choose to do with what remains. Her silence became her strength. Her invisibility became her power. And her stubborn refusal to look away from injustice became her legacy. Sometimes the stories that move us most aren't about heroes with perfect lives or easy choices. They're about broken people who find wholeness not through magic or miracles, but through the simple, terrifying decision to care, to act, to matter. If this story touched your heart, if Astrid's courage inspired you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. Because in a world that often feels cold and indifferent, these stories of stubborn hope and unexpected strength are what keep us going. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, your voice matters even when you think no one's listening.